everybody, and welcome back to Exit Podcast. Today's special guest is Scott Stirrett. He's with Venture for Canada and here to talk about all kinds of things. How are you, Scott? Thanks for joining the show.
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thrilled to have you.
Well, why don't you give us a brief overview of who you are, what you do? You run a nonprofit, is that correct?
Yes. I am the author of a new book called The Uncertainty Advantage, which is a guide for early career professionals on how to develop a better relationship with uncertainty, with the caveat that uncertainty is something that impacts all of us at every point in our lives and careers. And a little bit about me, I am from Canada. I went to Georgetown for undergrad, so I lived in the US for a while and worked at Goldman Sachs. And while I was at Goldman Sachs, I had the idea to create Venture for Canada, which is a national Canadian not-for-profit that helps young people develop entrepreneurial skills through a variety of programs. Over the past decade of building Venture for Canada, I have raised over $80 million to fund our programs and supported over 10,000 young people to launch their careers. And it's my experience building Venture for Canada that showed me firsthand that fear of uncertainty is one of the most significant things that holds people back in their life and career. And that's what motivated me to write my new book, The Uncertainty Advantage.
Well, I think that's right. And I think, there's a lot of different facets here, and I'm sure we can talk about many of them. But, not only is it just uncertainty in your career path, but like we talk about it a lot on this show, but like imposter syndrome, things like this, like there's uncertainty around everything, right? Whether it's, am I an authority in this matter, or do I deserve this job? Or, am I making the right decision in my dating life or whatever? Like there's total insecurity everywhere. So I think this idea of uncertainty, especially for young professionals, it for me anyway, has been hitting, or hits me very close to home. I've got an 18-year-old that just started college last week, and he's unsure his major. He doesn't know what to do. He feels like he needs to have all the answers and all that stuff. So he's swimming in this stuff. So I guess maybe let's start kind of at the beginning, and let's talk about uncertainty as an advantage.
At the core of my book is the belief that your ability to handle not knowing is going to be more important than what you know. And we live in a time that is defined by radical uncertainty, whether it is the political instability in the world or AI. The world is changing at a rapid pace. There's actually a thing called the Uncertainty Index that shows the world today is around 4 times more uncertain than it was in 2008. And we don't choose what era that we are born into, but we can choose what is our relationship with uncertainty. And because uncertainty is the defining aspect of our times, learning to embrace uncertainty, to not just tolerate it, but to actually benefit from it, is a superpower for someone in their life and career. And the great thing about uncertainty is it's a teachable skill. You can learn to cope better with uncertainty through a few different things I talk about in my book in more detail. So if you're somebody who is afraid of uncertainty right now, you're not predestined to fear uncertainty the rest of your life. You can get better at managing uncertainty over time.
Yeah, I think it's a really great point, because like if you think about it, like, and this will be a really gross history sketch, so don't anybody quote me on anything. But, like in the 30s, 40s, 50s, let's say, like you might go into the family business, or you'd work at the same factory that your dad did, or you'd, whatever. So like there weren't as many choices, I guess, right? And so in terms of certainty, you could basically go to school and work your career and kind of live whatever they call, at least in this country, the American dream. And you could do that without really having to worry about so much stuff, and then you fast forward to today. And like you mentioned, there's politics and everything, but just the internet alone, right, opened up the doors to so much more information and content and opportunities and suggestions and, all these things that have just really murkied up the water. And so more than just, I guess, learning to cope or I guess living a life that became more uncertain, like it's actively being pushed on you, like the uncertainty, right? Like this thing is like really being just wadded up and thrown at young people now. And I think it's just because of all the noise on the internet and social media and in life and business and everything. It's just, we live in such a complex world now. So how do you start to cope with some of that?
The only way out is through. You need to face uncertainty in the eyes and go directly into it. The more that you try to avoid uncertainty, the more that uncertainty ends up controlling you. And we live in an era where there are so many different opportunities out there for us. An era of rapid change means that both things can become like obliterated really fast, but it also means that there's new opportunities that can emerge really quickly. Look in the last 10 years, crypto, Bitcoin, AI startups, like the list goes on. Like if you're an early adopter of something that ends up becoming society changing, it can reap a ton of benefits for you. So what I encourage people in the book to think about is frame uncertainty as, rather than something to fear, think about what are all the possibilities and all of the opportunities that can come for you as a result of the uncertainty. So it really requires a mindset shift. If you view uncertainty in a positive way, I think you're much more likely to benefit from uncertainty.
So I'm sensing you had some uncertainty in your career. Is there a reason you decided to take on this topic, and why? It's an interesting one, but usually it comes from personal experience.
Absolutely. So both my experience helping a lot of people navigate uncertainty motivated me, but also my life experience, both loving uncertainty at some points, but fearing uncertainty at other times. In terms of when I really leaned into uncertainty was when I was 22. I was working at Goldman Sachs in New York City at the Goldman Sachs headquarters, and I quit my job to go create a not-for-profit that didn't exist, had no money, and I was literally working out of an apartment with no furniture, sleeping on the floor for like 2 months. And that was a time where I've loved uncertainty, and I've seen the benefits of it in my life and career over the last 11 years. But I also have been paralyzed by uncertainty. During COVID, it was a really tough time for me. I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. I really felt my world kind of become smaller and smaller. And things that today don't really stress me out at all, like 5 years ago, I felt like a shell of myself. Now I feel in some ways more comfortable with embracing uncertainty than at any other point in my life. The point being for a listener is that our relationship with uncertainty ebbs and flows. So Mike, to answer your question, this is deeply personal for me because I've seen that you can learn to develop an amazing relationship with uncertainty if you do certain things.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, I think people want, or I guess let's say, I think people think they want certainty, which is they want to have this direct path and they want to know what they're doing, And I always use this example of like sort of my wife and her sister. So my wife was from a young age, she wanted to be a teacher. She went to school to teach. Now she teaches, a pretty direct path, right? So in her case, there wasn't a lot of uncertainty because she knew exactly what she wanted to do. My sister-in-law, for example, she went to school as a to become a social worker. And she really loved that work and all that. But where she lives, it was difficult to find work making any money doing that. So she took a job at a semiconductor factory. And in that role, she was working as a project manager and stuff. And now she's really grown to embrace that and, has been promoted all the way up the chain and now works at a new company where she's doing this kind of work. And, but it was totally a different path. So if in her case, she had allowed that uncertainty, I guess, to kind of block her path, where she was just like, no, I have to do this because this is what I said I was going to do. Now this is what I do. She might have ended up, a shell of herself in some sense, which is that she may have been far less happy doing that work in the long run than she was, doing the work she's doing now. But by being open to uncertainty, or just kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, like rolling with the punches, she found a better opportunity that's now turned into a really fruitful career for her. And, she's totally happy, like having left all that behind. And I think that a lot of people could share an experience like that, where it's like you started out thinking that X was the path, but you turned out that Y was really where you wanted to go, and you actually ended up better off.
One of the core pillars of my book is the importance of adaptable thinking. And in an era of rapid change, setting really rigid plans for yourself is a waste of time. You need to be adaptive and iterative, because as your example with your sister-in-law illustrates, like, you need to be willing to roll with the punches, because the world changes in ways that are hard to anticipate. And what I advise in my book is to think about what's your life mission statement, what are your core values, and to create a really high level true north for yourself, and use that as your guiding path. Don't say in 1 year I want to have this job, and in 3 years I want to have this job, in 5 years I want to make XYZ amount of money, because life is unpredictable. And the more that you open up your world to a lot of different opportunities, the more you can capitalize on all of the uncertainty that exists out there in the world as well.
So most people don't quit a Goldman Sachs job and live in an apartment with no furniture. That to me, like, you've got goals and you've got ambitions and things, and they're important. And I want to like throw that out there that yes, you want to have a target, something you're going for. If you didn't have the idea to have the nonprofit and do that, you wouldn't have left your day job, and you would have just stuck with your 9 to 5 and done that. So there's got to be a in the middle kind of. You can't be just, I'm going to fly by the seat of my pants and what happens happens. You have to have some sort of like target or goal or thing to go for. So you can't just, yes, uncertainty happens and things change and you have to be flexible, but you do have to have some sort of idea of where you want to go.
Two different points. The first one is that risk taking is something that's easier if you have more of like a financial like safety net and support. And it's to acknowledge that it's like, if you don't have a baseline of like financial or like personal stability, I don't recommend going out at the deep end and taking massive risks. One of the things I talk about in the book is like, how do you put yourself in a position where you can take big risks in your life and career? And part of that is building up a financial safety net to protect yourself. So that's the first thing. Is everyone starts at a different point, but it's dangerous just taking big risks if you're not, if you don't have the proper kind of support in place. The second piece that I think is really important to say is that, yes, it's good to have a degree of like a plan. In my case, with leaving Goldman Sachs, I left and I had been working on Venture for Canada on the side for 7 or 8 months. So I had a pretty good sense that this was like a valid idea that could turn into a real thing. But when you were talking, Mike, it made me think of my current situation, because I'm still running Venture for Canada today, but we've hired a search firm. I'm actually leaving Venture for Canada at the end of this year. And after that, I'm going to go travel for 2 months, take a little break. And my plan is to go launch something new. I've reached a point in time where by the time I leave, it'll be almost 12 years. I am excited for a new kind of entrepreneurial journey. And in my case, I have even more of a safety net now. I know I want to be like an entrepreneur. I have an idea that I'm interested in pursuing, but the idea could end up evolving a lot. And anyway, all to say is that I think it's good to have a short-term plan. For me, I know what my true north is, which is that I want to launch like a startup, but I don't have like, I'm also not being rigid about it, that it needs to be XYZ idea, because as you folks probably know, once you get something into the market, your idea can evolve a ton. So to go back to my earlier advice, like set your broad goal of what you're trying to create. And in my case, it's a little bit more like I'm interested in creating a company in like a really specific kind of space. And then beyond that, I'm pretty like flexible on what that idea could evolve. So the point to listeners is, yes, create broad goals for yourself, but recognize that the best laid plans, once they're on the battlefield, can be thrown out pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if we could maybe talk a little bit about that idea of true north, right? Like it seems kind of commonplace, or like folks should know what their true north is, thinking about kind of who they are and what they like and what, the things they're drawn to and all that stuff. But what we find in talking to a lot of people is that we end up kind of living other people's lives. And especially for young people, it's really easy to get caught up in whatever social media direction you're drug, or whatever, path your friends are taking or whatever. So it gets even a little uncertain or a little murky around who you actually are. Do you have any tricks or anything that you do in your training that helps kids really identify who they are? I mean, I think if you really pin some kid down, and again, I'm just thinking of my own teenagers, but we can tell as parents, having lived with these kids for a long time, like kind of who they are in a number of facets, right? They behave this way. We can always expect they'll do this. They treat people this way because they always do, those kinds of things, where I don't know that a kid would be able to write all those down. Right. And so do you have any kind of methodology or approach that you guys use in sort of trying to yoke out somebody's true north, where they're being truly authentic about who they are and what they do and all that stuff, versus sort of I'm writing down what I think I need to so that I posture and look good as like sort of an entrepreneurial guy, or like, trying to put something out there that's maybe not totally me, but I'm wish casting a little.
in addition to what I shared earlier, which was like the personal mission statement, the thinking about your core values, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can do that. In terms of personal mission statement, think about building a mission statement that is pretty like broad. So for me, it's help others achieve their full potential. And I went through like 100 different versions of this like life mission statement like 5 or 6 years ago. But for me, it was really helpful to think about it and give myself the flexibility of that's a pretty broad mission, and it can turn into many different kinds of things. So the first piece of advice I would have for listeners is like put a lot of time and effort to create this like one sentence. Like spend like 3 or 4 months reflecting on it, share it with friends, share it with colleagues, write like 100 different versions down, and then align on something that works for you. In terms of the core values, I similarly say write down like the 30 values that stand out the most to you, then start to merge them together and then think what are like the 3 or 4 things that stand out to you, so that when your back is against the wall, when you're feeling the pressure, you're facing a moral dilemma, what are the values that you go back to? And I think, Ryan, that's really important in this context of like life purpose is really using almost a corporate tool that you'd use in corporate planning, but apply it to your personal life. Like there's so many young people I meet and I ask them, what is your mission statement in life? And they don't have any answer. They have no idea. And that's fine. But also you need to put like, we're all on this earth for a reason, I believe. And it's important that you reflect on like, what's like the purpose of your life? So many people work so hard to get grades in school and to succeed, but they don't think about the why. Like, why do they do all of those things? Like, what is like the purpose of it? It kind of blows my mind sometimes.
Yeah, and you see that in business owners and CEOs and everything, that they were chasing money or chasing whatever, and they don't know why. They're just doing it because it's the thing to do. I'm a CEO and therefore I go and make money and I do, or I enjoy this thing. But you find a lot of people, are, I guess, a little bit lost when they finally achieve, and that's why you see these people that never feel successful despite having done a number of successful things, or, being successful by most of society's metrics, and yet they're still unsatisfied.
Totally. Like, I feel like I know a lot of people who've achieved financial goals for themselves and they've developed like substance abuse disorders. Like it's because like they feel this like emptiness that is like deep, but because they've been wanting this goal. They want 10 million, they want $100 million. And then you get that and you're kind of like, well, now what? Like I now feel empty because this thing that I've been chasing for the whole of my life has now been achieved. And I have no greater sense of like purpose for why I exist in this like world. I think the other tool that's really helpful to think about is ikigai, which is like a Japanese term that's popularized a lot in kind of career development discourse, which breaks it down into 4 different things, which essentially gets people to ask this question of like, what are they good at? What does the world need? What can they be like, make like a decent like living on? What are they good at? What does the world need? What do they like? And what can they be like compensated for? So those are the 4 kind of things. And I think it's a great little sort of Venn diagram when people do it, because it really helps. Like some people can be Pollyannish and think, oh, I'm going to go like, play with koalas all day. Well, it's like, okay, what does the world need, and what does can you make a living on it? And in giving this advice is I'm not a big fan of the follow your passion. Like to Mike's point earlier, you need to be pragmatic, and unless you're like a child of a billionaire, on like how are you going to like pay your bills. But I think the ikigai concept also is something that's really helpful for people to be thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's right. So one of the things that we sort of touched on, and I think it's maybe just a natural next step in this conversation, is moving into this notion of entrepreneurial mindset for everybody. And I think in part it's kind of what you're describing here, putting kids on the path of mission statements and these things, right? You're sort of, and even just the adaptability that you mentioned, even in the work that you're trying to do moving forward, and coming out of school and leaving Goldman Sachs and starting this business, all these things are sort of the mind of an entrepreneur. And I think that there's some characteristics you can take there. I mean, there's plenty of entrepreneurial mindset things that we would probably not encourage. But I think that there's a lot in there that, as it pertains to adaptability and uncertainty and, finding advantages and looking for opportunities and all this stuff, that people could really benefit from adopting more of an entrepreneurial mindset. What do you guys, or how do you teach that, or how do you bring that to people who maybe aren't sort of naturally inclined to do that work?
To be entrepreneurial is to identify and act upon opportunities to create value for others. And to zoom in onto that, there's two main components. To identify, you have to be someone who is always out there scanning the horizon for different opportunities. You can do that through reading a really wide range of different kind of content. When I design my kind of reading plans for the year or choose what books to read, it's a very wide range of subjects like fiction, history, science, and I think it makes me a more creative person. But also go out and like talk with a really wide range of different people from all around the world who work in different industries. Like talk to people who have different views than yourself. And I think that's something that's really valuable in life. And that's how you can get better at identifying opportunities that are out there. Then beyond identifying, you need to act on opportunities. So run pilots, test ideas. Like just because you have a bunch of ideas doesn't mean anything if you don't act on it. Launch a side hustle. In Toronto, I run a little tour company where I take people on a food and history tour in a specific neighborhood in Toronto. I do it 2 or 3 times a year. And it's a great way to kind of flex my entrepreneurial muscle. You don't need to launch a full-on business that you're working full-time to be entrepreneurial. You can be entrepreneurial in so many different ways. And the final thing is that it's really important to think about an entrepreneurial mindset, not just in the context of a founder, but also for people who work in big companies, who work in any kind of sector. Increasingly in a world that is defined by rapid change, we all need to be like the CEOs of our own like life. And that means we need to take radical accountability for ourselves. I think the era of the 9 to 5, 40 hour a week for a 30-year job is like dead. And it's been dead for a long time. If you don't have an entrepreneurial mindset, you really risk being left behind in a world that is moving really, really quickly.
Very true. So when you started this new venture and you're trying to raise a bunch of money for a nonprofit, networking is one of those things that is critical for that. And developing a network of business professionals is important for any entrepreneur. Can you maybe talk about the first few years of starting the nonprofit and how you built your network to accommodate it?
Totally. When I moved back to Canada from New York, I moved to Toronto, which I didn't grow up in. I grew up in the far east coast of Canada, Nova Scotia, north of Maine by a fair bit. So a relatively isolated place in the context of North America. And when I moved to Toronto, I literally knew pretty much no one. Like no one well. I had some like acquaintances, but I was moving back to Canada, but in many ways I felt like I was an immigrant because I was moving to a place that I barely knew like a soul. And it required so much hustle that first summer. I just turned 23. I was 22 when I left Goldman Sachs. A month into being in Toronto, I turned 23. And that summer, I just met with a ton of people. I probably met with like 150 people that summer. I would just go on a coffee meeting, like tour through downtown Toronto. And I met with a ton of people, some who ended up becoming donors, some who ended up connecting me with people or organizations that became really significant donors to our work.
So were you just showing up at a coffee shop and saying, "Hey, how are you?"
No, I was not doing that.
Okay.
It's a great question. What I did initially was I cold emailed hundreds of people. I said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing. Can you chat?" And most people didn't reply, but enough did. And then every meeting that I had, I would ask, "Who else can you connect me with that you think would be interested about what I'm doing?" And then through that, it just kept on expanding and expanding. And I remember at one point in that year, I was thinking, "Oh, I met this person, and I was connected through this person who connected me to this person." So basically there was like 7 connections that had led me to this person. And if you're, I think, compelling in a one-on-one meeting and people like you, they just keep on making connections for you. And then all of a sudden you have this much larger network than you once did. But it requires a lot of gumption. The final thing I'll share is I feel like I've had to do this like time and time again in my career. We launched a program that's around entrepreneurship through acquisition, helping people learn how to buy businesses. I didn't know anybody in the sector. I just cold emailed a ton of people. Now I know 100 plus people in Canada who do business buying in the lower middle market. In a world where you need to reinvent yourself a lot, sometimes you're going to have to dive into industries or sectors where you're an outsider. And the advice I would have is cold email like a ton of people, go on a bunch of coffee meetings or virtual calls, and ask for additional people who you can get connected with. And the more you do that in a pretty short order of a couple of months, you can end up having a pretty strong network within the context of a specific domain.
So there's a couple things here that I wanted to kind of unpack, which is first, in today's world, I mean, especially just kind of keeping the theme of uncertainty, I think one of the things that brings uncertainty is sort of this fear, and this fear causes inaction. So it keeps people from doing things they ought to be doing. In a world where it's so much easier to stay home and sit on the computer and work from home and not be out networking and not meeting people and not doing those kinds of things, I think a lot of people have started to lose, or maybe at least don't flex, the skills required to go out and do this networking. However, in my experience, and even as a guy who runs an online agency, in my experience, in-person discussion is like kind of the only thing that really works. Like, I mean, you know, like you said, you can break ice and stuff over email and stuff like that, but like they need to know you. And most people really need to have a relationship with you before they're willing to actually work with you. Anything you would do or that you could talk to, I guess, in the sense of people who maybe, you know, and I'm thinking about like our software engineers and graphic designers and people like this who are sitting home and working on their computer. And for all intents and purposes, if they have a job and they have an employer, they could just be isolated and be alone. So how do these people go from having basically no interaction with people to building this network without, I mean, because I guess what happens is, you know, like we've been talking about with change, they lose a job or something and then they go out and they can't find one. And I've seen there's been a number of groups I've participated in online, you know, graphic designers and people looking for work. I run a design agency, so that's kind of where a lot of my people are. And so where these guys are on LinkedIn and they're like, man, I've put in 300 resumes and I'm not even getting a call back, you know, and they're being, you know, scrubbed off or filtered off. But all they're doing is sitting home filling out resumes. So it feels like they're doing something. But honestly, if they were out meeting people, they'd probably get a lot further, a lot faster. So is there anything, I guess, sort of in and around that realm? I don't have a specific question for you outside of to say, you know, how might you encourage somebody who's not doing the networking to go out and start networking?
If you're just filling out a bunch of resumes online, you're likely like wasting a lot of your time. Some people can still get hired that way, but something like 80% of all jobs are hired through like personal connections. So you need to go out and build your professional network. The sixth pillar of the Uncertainty Advantage, my book, is about the importance of network building. And in a world where things can change really quickly, you need to think about building your professional network, because all of a sudden you could lose your job. And then who is going to help you get your next job? It's your professional network. There's a great study that came out in 1972, I believe, by Mark Granovetter called The Strength of Weak Ties. It's perhaps the most cited sociology paper of the last 60 years. And what he talks about is he studied this question of like, how do people get hired? And it's not through their best friends. It's not through their family members. It's through their weak ties. It's through a large network of people that you know. And the advice I would have to be really concrete to someone who maybe is not comfortable doing this is, first off, is like the uncertainty muscle, your social muscles can be developed over time. The more that you put yourself out there, the better you are going to be over time at interacting with people and meeting strangers. I'm actually quite introverted. In high school, I was a lot more introverted. But you know what? My founding venture for Canada in the last 11 years, where I probably met 10,000 people, has pushed me out of my comfort zone. And now I am not that afraid of meeting with strangers, because I've had to literally do it pretty much every single day for 11 years. And when you do that every day for 11 years, the fear goes down considerably and you become a lot better at it.
Well, and I think that there's a good point there that is just, you know, we talked earlier, you sort of mentioned the idea of holding ourselves accountable or personal responsibility. And I think there is a component to this where it's like no amount of good advice on teaching people to go network is going to make them go network. If they're not willing to do the work, they're not going to grow. And I think that that's, you know, demonstrated by what you just said. I actually have a similar story, really introverted my whole life. I mean, I still kind of hate being on camera and I still hate the sound of my voice, but we've been doing the show for 8 years. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, like these are things that you go out and you force yourself to do it. And you know, for whatever reason, you know, we have different reasons and whys for why we do whatever. But I, much like you, was much more introverted in high school. I had no interest in going out and doing this. I don't want to public speak. I don't want to do any of those things. Yet now I've flexed that muscle enough that if called upon, it's no problem, right? And I'm happy to make a phone call, and I'm happy to talk to people and stuff like that. But if I wasn't forced to do it, or if it wasn't part of my, I guess, the only way to be successful in my career, if that wasn't what it was, I would also be really easy. Like, it would be easy for me to slip into not doing that. So I think it's to your point, it's not unlike going to the gym or whatever. It's, you got to flex that muscle, and you really got to practice it. So if you want to find success in networking, you actually have to go network. You can't kind of wish it into place, when you need people.
I actually, I was just going to say that I think a skill that a lot of young people should actually try and do, get a sales job. Do something where you're actually selling something, whether it's on the phone or in person, or I used to sell auto glass door to door. Like, I'd go and see a crack in their windshield and say, "Hey, looks like you need a new windshield. How can we help?" kind of thing. And just the first few times, it's very scary to go up and knock on someone's door and try and start having a conversation and sell them a windshield for their car. But after you've done it a few times, it's almost second nature, and it seems like it becomes easier and easier. And what do you know? You're selling more windshields. You're making more money. And just having that skill set and the ability to start a conversation with anyone and hold a conversation with anyone and be their friend, and it's everyone's on their phone these days. Everyone's staring at Instagram, at YouTube, and they'll sit next to someone at a plane for 4 hours and not say one word to them. And that to me, I mean, I'm guilty of that. I'll get in an Uber and hope that they don't say anything to me because I'm not in the mood. But at the same time, networking and building a business relationship is critical to your success. And if you don't take that first step and actually start having conversations with people, you're not going to go anywhere.
Well, and I would just add to that too, that, I mean, it's going to be a superpower for the young people who can do this, for that very point, right? I mean, a lot of people spend a lot of time in their devices or solo or whatever, and they're not flexing this muscle, to keep that gym metaphor going. And, so they're not exercising that muscle. So then, the kids who are capable of doing that, or the young people who are capable of doing that, will be the ones who gain the most traction, who move the furthest, the fastest. And, also just in the gym metaphor realm, I mean, it's amazing how fast your network will grow. Just like, hitting the bench press every day or whatever, it might seem like it's taking forever, but you'll look back 3 months ago and you go, oh, wow, I'm lifting all this extra weight. And same thing with your networking, especially if you're smart, like Scott said here about, asking for referrals and things like that. Because when people know you, like you, trust you, they will, bend over for you backwards, even if they're not real close, to your point about the weak ties, so they don't have to know you that well. They just have to know they like you enough to tell their friend about you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'll share something like that I've done as well to think around how I can nurture my weaker ties. Is I mentioned I met a lot of people through my work at Venture for Canada. And earlier this year, mainly motivated by book promotion, I created a monthly Substack where I email different folks that I know, and I share the best things that I've read over the course of the year. And as I've talked with people, I say, oh, it's okay to kind of add you. And over the past year, I've added around, there's been now around 1,400 people who subscribe to the Substack. And most are people that I know in some kind of way. There's some who I don't know, but probably 90% I have some kind of relationship with. And there's 60% of people who open it every month. And it's a really efficient way to keep in touch with 1,400 people that I know. And over time, these things compound. Who knows, a year from now, maybe it's 3,000 people. And I can put out to this group of people, hey, what are your thoughts on this subject? And a bunch of people come back with ideas. One of the things I would actually really encourage more people to think about, because I feel like no one does this, is create a monthly newsletter for yourself and do it in a way that is not just Christmas card and bragging. It's around actually adding value. It's not here's a picture of me on the beach. I think if you are adding value and you're keeping in touch with people, it could even be once a quarter. It's just a way so that they're constantly like reminded that like you exist. So then you're nurturing that relationship in like an efficient way. So that's one thing I personally found has been really helpful for my own life. And I recommend a lot of others think about doing it. It's not that much work.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a good thing to think about too, especially for, I mean, there's this idea or this notion of 1,000 true fans, this guy Kevin Kelly talks about. And, it has to do a lot with business and things like that. If you have a business, but you have 1,000 true fans, that's really all you need to find success. That's enough people. And so, but also to the point of like your Substack, right? I think people feel this pressure, like, oh man, I don't have 1 million subs. I don't, people aren't paying attention, blah, 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 blah. It's like, no. You don't need 1,000. Like in the case of your list, for example, you have 1,400 people who you actually have some kind of relationship with, or whatever percentage of those people you do. And so it's like, so yeah, that ability to keep in touch. I mean, you may not be able to keep a close relationship with everyone through a newsletter, but you're kind of keeping, for I guess to keep it in sort of business parlance, you're keeping that lead warm, right? You're talking to that person, and you just never know when you're going to need a thing. I mean, we do this all the time with the podcast, right? I mean, you mentioned earlier. You were trying to find people who knew something about buying and selling businesses. If I had known you then, we've had a dozen of them on the show that I could have pointed you to, including a few in Canada. You know what I mean? And it's like, so we meet people that do these things. And so like, just by having a connection with us, I could have made that connection for you. And then you could have made, so, I mean, it's funny how just staying warm and building that relationship and staying in touch and, and it just doesn't take that much work,
I would even say that just having the gumption to ask, like a lot of people, they have the connections and they have the friends, but they aren't willing to ask them for help or ask them for a referral. And just that step in the process is what's going to build your business exponentially. If you, in the sales position that I had, hey, do you know anyone that has a broken windshield? Can we help them? That question just do you know anyone that can help with this nonprofit? Do you know anyone that's interested in this or X, Y, and Z? You leverage their network to help build your network. And
yeah. Well, and I don't know, Scott, if you have a thought around that. I mean, even just me selfishly, I mean, like this is something I don't do either, right? So, I mean, I've met a lot of people over the years. I know a lot of folks. I never ask for anything ever. And it's not that people wouldn't be willing to help. It's just, I don't know. I don't feel like I want to come to people and bother them with my dumb thing, whatever it is. And so is there something, I guess there's a trait there or a characteristic or a strength to build, which is this willingness to ask, not to be abusive of those you care about, or maybe you don't even know them that well, but, so you don't want to be abusive of this, but how can we, I guess, leverage our network in a way that doesn't feel, oppressive or like we're trying to get something out of people in a greedy way?
I think the first is like give value to your network. Like the more that you are authentically generous, seeking nothing in return, the more that I think you are going to be like successful. But you have to do it in like an efficient way. When I was early in my career, I could say like yes to everyone because I didn't have that many demands. I'm now reaching a point in my career where I have enough inbound things where people are asking me to do things that I can't do it all. Like I'm beginning to have to say no more than ever. So I should share that in the sense that sometimes the give first, people are like, okay, yeah, sure. And then people get burnt out. But you have to think about how can you give in a way that is sustainable. So for me, often that's just like email introductions. Like I know a lot of people in Canada. If someone needs help with something, I'll think, oh, who's a good person for them to talk to? And then I connect them and then it takes me 2 minutes. And potentially that adds a lot of value to those different people. Or I'll do like a quick 30-minute call. I talked to someone a couple of years ago and she was in the early stages of creating a not-for-profit and I gave her some advice. And then like 2 years later, she just LinkedIn messaged me like a couple of weeks ago and said, thanks so much. Like this not-for-profit wouldn't exist if it wasn't for some of the advice that you gave me. So anyway, just be judicious in your giving because the more well-known you become, the harder it is to say yes to everything, and you have to be pretty judicious. The other thing I'd say is that, just in general, think about ways that you can like add value to other people. My newsletter, like I send out curated things, like what are the best book that I read, the best articles. Like I try to, those are little things, but I'm trying to like add value to other people. So that, and many people have said, hey, I watched this TV show because you recommended it. I read this article and it changed my perspective on this. So there's many different ways that you can help other people. But to answer your question, Ryan, I think the way that you create a network that ultimately benefits you is you actually create a network that benefits other people.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So I want to change or turn corner a little bit and talk about something different that I think you sort of advocate for, that I think is a little bit controversial. And it's one of these things that it never ends. It goes back and forth, right? So I don't think there's really a true right answer here. So, but I love the idea of exploring this idea, because both Mike and I fall into this bucket. So one of the things you tend to advocate for, at least my understanding is that you advocate for being a generalist in your skills. Over maybe niching down or specializing, and maybe there's a case for both sides of this. But for in the sense of generalization, both Mike and I are wild generalists. We do a million things for a million people and all this stuff, and we always have done it that way. And this notion of niching down into a specific thing is, at least for myself, and I won't speak for Mike, but for me, it's really stifling, this idea that I can only do this one thing forever. Because look at me, I can do all these things. And so, what are your thoughts around sort of generalist skills versus specialized skills, and like what role does each play?
I think that generalist skills are going to become more and more important. And the reason being is AI. AI is a game changer that I think will mean that we all will be able to tap into certain specialist skills that we didn't previously have the ability to do. Think about like vibe coding, which we're just probably at the beginning of. But the ability to do a lot of technical things through AI is just going to, I think, take off, which means that then the ability to be a generalist is going to be more and more important, because the most important skills to me that fall under this generalist umbrella are collaboration, the ability to work well with other people, the ability to manage your time and attention effectively, to prioritize. These are the skills that are important. Communications, public speaking. Those are the things that are harder to automate. And also, in a world that is rapidly changing, whole sectors, I think, are going to get obliterated. And if you're going to be resilient as like a job seeker or as like an entrepreneur, it's the people who can reinvent themselves like half a dozen times that are going to be the most successful. How do you reinvent yourself? You have generalist skills that are portable to different industries. So, if you're working in a semiconductor plant and for a reason semiconductor industry changes and there's no jobs there, that you can then move to a completely different sector because you have some of these generalist skills that are really helpful. So in final short is, I think it's to say a caveat that yes, are specialist skills still going to be valuable in some settings? Absolutely. Are we still going to have doctors? Are we still going to have lawyers? Are we still going to have accountants? Yes. Often some specialists will get their back up when there's, you're saying, you're presenting this like extreme kind of like vision. What I'm saying is, to be super clear, is that generalist skills are going to be more important today than they were in the past. That is not to say that specialist skills are going to become completely unimportant. It's just in relative terms, I think we're going into a world where you're going to see generalist skills more and more important, and you're going to see a relative decline in the importance of specialist skills in most industries.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And in fact, one of the things that I think of a lot, because I do think about whether, that there could be something in being a specialist that makes you attractive if you happen to be in the right vertical, right? So like if you happen to be in a field that's easily replaced by AI, then maybe it'll be a challenge. But if you happen to be a specialist in some categories, I don't know what they are, but if you happen to be a specialist in a specific area that's not necessarily affected negatively by AI and technology, then I think you still have a real opportunity in that space. And that being the specialist is actually going to be a good thing. But then as I thought more about it and I sort of trickle it down, I think what it really is specialist, generalist, whatever. I think being a generalist is ultimately better, but I think what you have to have is a perspective. And I think if you as a generalist have, and this goes back to our discussion early on about, core values, things like this. I think that you having a perspective or an idea or a direction or a something, I think that is going to be where the difference is made between just somebody who's just a broad generalist who's just like willing to, be a cog in any machine, and then like, potential leaders down the road who actually have a point of view and a vision, and they want to take things in a certain direction. They may have generalist skills, but by layering on this notion of having a perspective, I think it would make you even more powerful in that space, where maybe that would have been the role of a specialist before. You're specializing in a thing and your perspective is around that thing. But I think being a generalist or having generalist skills and then layering on the sort of the specialist trait of having a perspective, I think will be a great hybrid for people as we sort of navigate AI.
Yeah. I honestly think that, the specialism versus the generalist, I think it all depends on what career or what focus you're going into. I mean, if you're a plumber, you can't use AI to fix it. And so if it's a hard skill, if it's, I'm sure there's going to be something that comes up, but, you see these robots laying sheetrock and you're like, okay, I didn't think that would happen, but it's happening. So, generalist, like, yes, it's important to have skills and all that the plumber needs to market. Now you can use marketing or AI to help with that, or things that, weren't necessarily an option back in the day. You would hire someone like Ryan to do that for him, but now it's kind of like, it's almost a hybrid. But, I do see, like in web development, for example, there used to be front end and back end developers. They'd specialize in the front end, the UI, the user experience, versus the database and the SQL calls and the authentication and the server side run, all the different things that a back end engineer would specialize in over a front end engineer. And now AI is it's creating the ability to do both, but at the same time, if you have the knowledge of a back-end engineer or the knowledge of a front-end engineer, you can fix it when AI messes it up inevitably, because it's still early on, and I know that's going to be a major problem for some startups that use vibe coding to actually get there. They're going to eventually have to hire someone to actually make it work the way it's supposed to. So specializing is still important. I don't think that generalization is the ultimate way, but I think it's definitely more prevalent these days. Because even 3 years ago, Ryan, we were talking about the importance of niching down and being a specialist before AI was a thing. We've been doing this long enough that it's a whole new world out there compared to when we started. So
well, and to the point, Scott's point about sort of generalist skills, though, like, even with AI, I mean, yeah, we might have advocated more for niching into some categories before, but I mean, just even in my own experience, right? I'm not a software engineer, but I'm just old enough that I grew up in an era where if you wanted to be online, you had to build a website, so you had to learn HTML and some, basics anyway. Then I went on to lead software teams and stuff like that, but I wasn't doing the building, but I know how to talk to them and I know how to, work through what it is they need to get done, or articulate what needs to get done when working with a software team. So with AI, even I can build full end-to-end, websites and apps and things like that. I mean, I built our latest website on a flight to Spain a couple of weeks ago, and and I would have never been able to do that before on my own. But I know enough about it to be able to work my way through that. So to your point, Mike, like if you have specialist skills in those, then AI is going to supercharge you. But if you don't, if you're a generalist, more like I am, then even I'm being supercharged, and being able to move into areas where I would have had to hire somebody to build my prototype before. But now I can just ask the AI to do it. Obviously It's not that simple, but so for me, the generalist skills are still working, but it's because of, I guess some degree of specialization across multiple generalized topics.
Yeah, very true. Well, Scott, it's almost that time. Do you want to tell people where they can reach out, how they can get in touch with you, if they have any questions or concerns or want to read your book?
Absolutely. So to check out The Uncertainty Advantage, you can buy it on Amazon.com. It comes out September 16th in the United States. It's already available as of August 19th in Canada, where on Amazon.ca, it's already been a bestseller in 2 categories and topped the top 1,000 books on Amazon. And to learn more about me, you can check out my Substack by checking out Scott Stirrett. And you can also visit my website by just Googling STIRRETT.com. And on my website, there is a short quiz where you can get a score to figure out what is your current relationship with uncertainty. It gives you a score from 0 to 48. And one of the first steps in learning to develop a better relationship with uncertainty is understanding what is your current relationship with uncertainty. So those are the main ways that you can find out about me. And in terms of buying the book in general as well, you can buy it at Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores across the U.S. Thanks.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Scott. This has been awesome. I think it's going to be something I'm going to make my kid listen to. I think this stuff's really important. I've noticed just with kids, my own kids, but kids his age, 18, they just, they lack a resilience that I think was maybe more common in an older generation, where they don't handle change as well as we once did. And maybe it's because we've grown up through all the Wild West and the chaos of the internet and all this stuff appearing over our ages, or over our, tenure, that so much change has happened that we were kind of forced to be good at it. But for at least for my kid and for friends of his, I know that this idea of being adaptable and stuff like that is really scary right now, especially as they're just entering college and trying to figure out what to do from there. So I think this is all really great information. So thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.